In early 2014, the European Union and the United States declared smart sanctions against Russia for attacking Ukraine. The sanctions financially restricted certain Russian companies and blacklisted people in Putin's inner circles. And it's hoped that the sanctions will pressure Putin into complying with international authorities over the recent conflict in Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government on Tuesday launched what it's calling an anti-terrorist operation to retake key government buildings seized by pro-Russian separatists in several cities in Ukraine's eastern provinces.
Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko on Thursday accused Russian forces of invading Ukraine, saying that troops supporting separatists have moved along the border, and called an urgent Security and Defense Council meeting to decide how to proceed. Rebel forces backed by purported Russian tanks fought against Ukraine government forces on two fronts on Thursday, southeast of Donetsk and in the southern town of Novozovsk, about 20 kilometers from the Russian border.
Moscow maintains that it is only targeting ISIL, but rebels say its planes are hitting those opposed to President Assad.
Footage which purports to show a Russian airstrike near the Syrian town of Aleppo. Russian jets and Iranian soldiers are getting ready to support a major Syrian army ground offensive in the northwest of the country, targeting rebels in Aleppo.
China's alarming creation of entirely new territory in the South China Sea is one part of a broader military push that some fear is to challenge U.S. dominance in the region.
America will start World War III with China. At least that's the message from China's hawkish state-run media, Global Times.
When the Syrian civil war started in 2011, relations between Russia and the West began to deteriorate. Tensions finally reached Cold War levels in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Radio crackles with a
in the Pacific, many believed that war with China was impossible, but the opposite could never be more true.
Islands, man-made by China, hundreds of miles from its coast.
This divide brought the two sides to each other's throats as they battled for influence. The war in eastern Ukraine remained frozen until after a few years later when Russian and Ukrainian rebels fired on a military checkpoint.
Federica Mogherini, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, has called into question Russia's commitment to de-escalating its military activities in Ukraine, saying that increasing attacks in government-held areas in the war-torn East violate February's ceasefire deal agreed in Minsk.
Від танки підходили практично впритик до людей, до 15 метрів. Потім люди відійшли, тобто всі підрозділи наші відійшли співпраці. На даний момент всі повернулися знову ж таки на цей блокпост. Як ви бачите, він повністю розбитий. Забрали своїх погибших товаришів і тепер несемо далі службу на цьому блокпосту.
In July 2014, an international incident happened when an anti-aircraft missile downed Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, killing all 298 people on board. After the conflict had become violent once again, another tragedy happened over Ukraine. Another Malaysian plane, MH520, was down only a few miles from the town of Mayinka. The war had risen, tensions once again.
I think the passengers would have known very little about it. It would have been quite instantaneous. The missile itself would have been travelling more than Mach 3, so it really is supersonic, going very, very quick.
All over the world, protests erupted on the streets, demanding an end to the violence.
I don't want war. I'm afraid for the children and for the future.
Even in Russia, people call on the government to end combat operations. However, they do not know that this is only the beginning. Several days later, Qatar Airways Flight 219 departs for Oslo with American and EU citizens. History repeats itself a third time as the plane is shot down in northern Syria. The international community regrets refusing to close the airspace over Syria years earlier. As rescue teams uncover the debris, NATO released satellite footage of a Russian plane downing the airliner. President Hillary Clinton had this to say to the world.
I think the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian civilians who have been fighting against the separatists have proven that they are worthy of some greater support than we have up to date provided.
In the Mediterranean, American aircraft carriers become the second step to a wider conflict.
6207, contact 175, 72 miles, for the flight of 2, Angels 10.
Airstrikes tear down the Syrian government's forces.
Allahu Akbar, qasaf baramiyut.
Allahu Akbar. In Ukraine, the war has turned as American planes fire at the pro-Russian rebels. Putin has declared war on the West after enough of his people have died.
Женщины, дети, старики, и большинство из них это граждане Российской Федерации. В соответствии с Конституцией и федеральным законодательством, как президент Российской Федерации, я обязан защищать жизнь и достоинство российских граждан, где бы они ни находились. И мы не допустим безнаказанной гибели наших соотечественников.
Despite Russia's warnings to leave Ukraine and Syria, NATO prepares for a full-scale war. All necessary weapons are stocked as old battle plans are brought up. In Moscow, Russia displays its armed forces in a show of strength. All over the world, civilians fill their basements with food, expecting the worst. Automobiles jam the roads as people flee for the countryside. The city streets are now deserted and silence grips the world. To anger Russia even more, Sweden now enters the NATO alliance. Inside the BES borders, the Russian military slowly moves towards the European nations. All the flights are cancelled as the sky is reserved for the military. It is now the calm before the storm. Russia, China and some of their allies form a coalition, sharing equipment and weapons. The main target in Russia's eyes are the Western missile defenses. Without them, NATO countries are vulnerable to nuclear strikes. It would be the perfect bargaining chip to have NATO stand down. It is a sign that modern wars have become a game of capture the flag. After several silent weeks passed, many believe that the situation has thawed. However, one by one, Russian aircraft begin their campaign.
Это да! Охренеть!
Chinese military attaches arrive in Europe, ready to assist the Russians. Troops from Belarus aid them as well. The attack starts with Russian forces moving into Poland. From the mainland, another force moves into the Baltic states. Across the Baltic Sea, the Russian Navy attacks Sweden. In the sky, F-16s and Eurofighters battle Russian MiGs. The fighter planes attempt to soften the area for ground troops to move in. On the ground, NATO and partner nations battle for the fate of the missile defense batteries. In Ukraine, the devastation is beyond imagination. Much of the forests remain intact, however the grounds are littered with casualties.
Check fire! Once attacked, they return fire, both from behind makeshift bunkers and from the warriors. Many of the troops here were deployed in Afghanistan or Iraq, where they were fighting insurgents. So this more traditional type of warfare is something different.
Some last involved in a campaign which is largely to learn from those lessons about forgetting power and conducting expeditionary warfare.
Хуяся нахуй, блядь!
They're super tough. The biggest difference between us and them is, through 10 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, what we've been used to is urban fighting. So we've lost a lot of the fieldcraft of what it is like to fight in the woods.
After many days and nights of fighting, the lines have barely moved. All the peace negotiations ended in failure. In the skies above Europe, Russian bombers drop cluster bombs on any military target, vital to the war effort. Civilians that live close to military bases are caught in the crossfire.
Good for their families to remember is that they did not die in vain. They saved 2 civilians.
The night skies are illuminated by anti-aircraft fire.
At one stage we saw a surface-to-air missile take off, presumably fired in an attempt to down one of the incoming Tomahawks.
The war, however, is not limited to Europe.
The head of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, warning a new generation of Russian cruise missiles could strike critical military radars and missiles inside the United States.
The development of the cruise missiles that they have that have a very long range, that from Eastern Russia, they can range critical infrastructure in Alaska and in Canada that we rely on for a homeland defense mission.
In an attempt to disorientate the Americans, Russian bombers attack critical infrastructure on the North American west coast. Civilian residential areas are struck as well.
Politicians talk and discuss about X number of National Guardsmen and waiting to find out. I don't know what they're waiting for. This is a war zone, and the ultimate, and I'm not a strategic general, when you come in here, you got to bring in the troops. And if you don't bring in the troops, by the time you're going to get through, all you're going to have is ashes. And so this is the situation we face right now.
The US and Canada closed their airspace while their jets patrol the night skies. As civilians on both continents pay the price, the Chinese government is angry about its losses in Europe. They use this motive to assert their territorial disputes. The new mission of the Chinese is to protect their interests from the Southeast Asian nations with the support of the Russians. Across China, protests erupt in opposition to this decision. However, they are violently struck down by the Chinese police. In the South China Sea, the People's Liberation Army Navy surrounds its artificial islands. In the following hours, they destroy all Filipino and Vietnamese ships that come close. With a mutual defense treaty in place, the US Navy intervenes. They are aided by the Japanese, who now have the right to fight overseas. The next morning, the Chinese are ready for another fight. Their missiles and cannons fire at the incoming Allied ships. The American and Japanese ships quickly retaliate, intending to allow freedom of navigation in these waters. The Chinese have home field advantage in these waters. However, superior technology allows the Allies to hold their ground. They inflict heavy casualties on the Chinese ships. As the British Royal Navy arrives to help, the Allies gain the upper hand, but the battle falls into a stalemate. Yet, the Chinese have another ace up their sleeve. A large amphibious force heads for the northern Philippines to open a new front on the American ships. US Marines and Japanese ground troops rushed to aid the Philippine military on the mainland. As the Chinese bring heavy weapons to the mainland, the Allies are outnumbered and outgunned. The Chinese now have a superiority, outnumbering the few Allied aircraft deployed to the island. By nightfall, the US and its allies are on the retreat as the Chinese overrun the northern Philippines. the night of the occupation, civilians protest against their unwelcomed guests. The occupying army opens fire on the unarmed crowd.
We picked up a woman with a bullet in the head and took her to the nearby children's hospital, into a scene of near mayhem. Casualties were arriving every few seconds, on bikes, rickshaws, park benches, carried in, all with gunshot wounds. Housewives, elderly residents, people shot while sitting in their homes. The operating theatre was overflowing, many of the staff in tears. In 20 minutes, 40 seriously injured were brought for emergency surgery. 2 were already dead. In the streets, many came up to us, shaking with anger and disbelief and fear. Many were terrified, saying there would be retribution. There was not one voice on the streets which did not express despair and rage. Tell the world, they said to us.
By morning, the lines have stabilized as Australian troops join the war in the South China Sea.
The intended effect is suppression of the enemy port positions.
Last man!
Mark 49 at the moment.
While the two powers combat each other in other parts of the world, North Korea sees this as an opportunity to strike. A large artillery barrage is aimed at Seoul, the South Korean capital.
네, 지금 연평 면사무소에 포탄이 떨어지는 장면이
이거 뭐 육지로 가야 되냐 어떻게 되냐 근데 갈라게도 갈 수가 없어요. 배가 없기 때문에.
그렇죠. 뒷산 시뻘건 불길이 타오릅니다. 온 산을 뒤덮은 불길은 면사무소 지척까지 번져 발걸음을 옮기고 있는 할머니와 어린이들의 모습이 위태로워 보입니다.
The South Korean artillery retaliates shortly after. While shells cross each side of the border, the South sinks any intruding vessel from the North. Skirmishes occur in the DMZ as South Korean troops hold out with the 28,000 US troops stationed there. Although they outnumber their southern neighbors, the North Koreans have unreliable technology, and apart from starving, they are low on morale. The advanced F-15s quickly destroy the outdated MiGs and rule the air. After several battles, the South Koreans crossed the bridge of no return, a place that hasn't been touched in over 40 years. With their missiles and forces not working properly, the North Koreans cannot fight back. Without China, Kim Jong-un's days are limited. In the skies above Syria, American and Russian planes finally fight each other.
The sun came up, shooting started, and nothing really went to plan.
Get across this fast. Go, go. That's a bad place here. Go.
I don't think Russia and China believe they are paying any price at all, nothing at all, for standing up on behalf of the Assad regime. The only way that will change is if every nation represented here directly and urgently makes it clear that Russia and China will pay a price because they are holding up progress, blockading it, that is no longer tolerable.
With the US spread too thin, they look for another source of ground troops. After much negotiations, Israel has finally agreed to combat Syrian and Iranian forces on the ground. Their promise is the disputed territory they claim.
Давид, тут. Идем туда. מה עושים במרחק כזה? מה עושים במרחק כזה? מה עושים במרחק כזה? 10 מטר הוא יורה עליכם.
It's about half a mile between here and the town. They've got to make sure there's absolutely no enemy combatants en route. So slowly but surely they're running forwards, clearing the area, and then they're going to end up in the middle of a city, running up and down stairs, blowing up walls, and generally shitting themselves.
בין העצים יש מלוכלכים. משען רשע יש. הדלת.
Okay, we were just coming over, and the snipers started taking pot shots at us, so we had to dive into this trench. I'm not sure I'd fancy my chances of taking a city after running across this fucking desert. So they've made it up to the town borders. The next step is getting in without getting shot.
תתאר לי את המבנה בבקשה.
מואר או מוצל?
The challenges are endless. I mean, the danger is endless. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, the urban fighting would be only for special units. But now it's come to day-to-day training. That's our biggest mission. It's wherever we go, whether it's Lebanon, if we go to Gaza, if it's to the West Bank, wherever we go, it's urban fighting. I've been here 3 or 4 times, and every time I've had, there's been an army from a different country coming to train over here. I've seen the Marines, I've seen the UN training here. I mean, militaries from all over the world come and train here.
For years, no end has come to the war in Syria. However, peace talks were arranged to bring Iran out of the war. The results were yet to be seen.
The experience of the Vienna deal should be considered as a base for trust between our regional partners. We are far away from a result in Syria, but even if there's a long way to go, we need to know that we have commitments to Syrians and the people in neighbouring countries to do something which produces a result.
From Europe to the Middle East to the Pacific to the US, the world is thrown in flames. Many are afraid that nuclear weapons may be used at some point. A country that was once passive, China now asserts more claims in a show of strength. This time, it is on its western border. China brings an old enemy into the war after a standoff turned violent. In the wilderness of the Arunachal Pradesh, India joins the West side, delivering intelligence and fighting for its borders. Only a few months of war have cost both sides more than 100,000 soldiers and civilians. Because neither side can come to terms, a ceasefire is agreed in neutral Switzerland. The ceasefire is unstable, to say the least, as minor skirmishes rumble between the two sides on all fronts. On the home front, the economy booms to provide arms, equipment, goods and rations. It is all desperately needed for the war effort.
The key to our success here is not necessarily in all the machinery and the buildings and the infrastructure, but in the people that work and make our product that goes out to support the warfighter.
We want to make the best ammunition to support the troops, and I think that we as Lake City take great pride in what we do.
I really feel that it's important that we make good quality product because we have relatives over there, we have friends over there, and I really feel that we do good quality work, so when they go out there on that field, they know that they have good product from this company.
However, relief from the 2008 recession comes at a cost. Over the course of a year, the war has become a frozen conflict. Tensions continued to escalate despite the absence of heavy fighting. The two sides finally reached the tipping point one night in the Black Sea. Who fired the first shot is still disputed, but a Russian submarine and two American patrol ships brought an end to the war of words. For the first time since the beginning of the war, British and American submarines managed to sneak into Russian-controlled waters undetected. Their missiles managed to destroy the coalition command center. With the coalition forces in disarray, NATO unilaterally withdraws from the ceasefire and pushes its way into occupied territory. The superior numbers of the coalition forces are outmatched by NATO's superior technology. After the Russians are pushed back, NATO patrols the border in large numbers, worrying their demoralized enemy. Despite assurances from Western governments that any attack on Russia is off the table, the Russians prepare for the worst. The Russian government relocates to St. Petersburg, where a new command post is set up. The nation is now under martial law and military forces quickly regroup. To discourage any further military action, the paranoid Russian leaders launch 5 nuclear missiles from Kaliningrad in a show of force. NATO's missile defenses quickly respond, shooting down the incoming threats. Fears deepen all over the world as weapons, untouched from the Second World War, come on stage. While the other Western nations refuse to utilize their nuclear weapons, President Clinton decides to set an example. Many argue that this particular example is too much. As a tactical nuclear weapon is launched, its mission is to reach its target undetected by nightfall.
Охуеть.
Ого, что это такое, командир?
After a 1 megaton nuclear bomb destroys the Russian capital, Western leaders beg their opponent to back down. However, no answer comes from the other side.
Даю отсчет. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Пуск.
Struck with panic, Russia fires multiple nuclear missiles.
Пошла, родная. Пошла.
Боевой ракетный комплекс ШАП с ракетой РС-18 по натовской классификации «Скелет». Боевой ракетный комплекс шахтного базирования «Тополь-М».
NATO's radars and satellites quickly find the threats and launch intercept missiles at them.
4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
The missile defenses vary from short-range to long-range interceptors. across Europe and America, NATO fires 2 interceptors for every ballistic missile. Over the past decade, Russia has criticized NATO's missile shield because it undermines the concept of nuclear deterrence. Most of the missiles are destroyed either inside or outside the Earth's atmosphere. As America targets 2 Russian military installations, no word comes from the negotiating table. With Russian missile defenses too weak, Washington continues another strike. As a way to get around their no-first-use policy, China regards an attack on Russia as an attack on its own soil. Missiles are launched at the United States, however they meet the same fate as the Russian ones. The White House follows the logic that if China were to back down, Russia would do the same. All tactical missiles are armed. Over the capital, Beijing, another bomb explodes, destroying the Chinese command center. With almost their entire country overrun, many defectors moving to the other side, North Korea attempts to use the same weapon, but they were destroyed the same way. In the west, India marches into Chinese territories from the east. Taiwan begins an attack of its own. China is then forced to retreat from the South China Sea. Despite anti-nuclear protests at home, America continues to soften up their targets for India and Taiwan to proceed. One by one, major military installations in China are turned to ash. Many of China's people die in the blast as the world stays quiet. With the coalition nations defenseless, they are forced to surrender. Only a few days later, a peace treaty is signed at the United Nations. A new pro-Western and more democratic government is formed in Russia. The People's Republic of China is disbanded and Taiwan takes the mainland, ending the division of the two countries.
Let me say that Taiwan is a symbol of what a free market system can create. Your island nation is one of the most powerful engines of economic growth in the world. You are to be applauded for your commitment to freedom and to fair elections and to free market growth. And I am proud of your accomplishments.
In New York, the world calls for the disarmament of all nuclear weapons. The results were grueling as radioactive areas were in great need of decontamination. Those actions are still being run today. As the world celebrates the end of the war, much has changed. Russia and China have lost all previous territorial claims. The European Union's position was strengthened on the global scale. The war effort made their industry flourish. Syria was divided into many nations to keep the peace between ethnic groups. The United Republic of Korea was formed after the South had unified the peninsula. Almost 70 years of conflict had ended. President Clinton was asked to resign from office and was put under investigation because of her decisions during the war. Many more polls all over the world showed a positive view of the US because of the fight it put up. At home, it strengthened American pride. However, the war also strengthened anti-American sentiment because of the immense destruction it caused with nuclear force. A large example was the growing Hispanic population. They had chosen a new identity.
You guys are illegal. America is a murdering machine. You guys
like you're preaching the Brown Mein Kampf. What do you want, Liberstein?
I don't know. Here's what we want. We want you guys to go back to Europe.
What do you want, Poland, man?
We want you guys to go back to Europe. Yeah.
You'd have no economy.
Hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Poland, man. That's what you're doing.
Are you? Hey, why are you worried about that? Go back to Europe. Go back to Europe.
We just want you on.
Go back to Europe. No, you guys go back to Europe. We want the whole continent. This is our continent. continent. This is our continent. We are the indigenous people of this continent. You are the illegals.
Don't speak for people.
You are illegal, and you're speaking as illegal. If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have this land. You wouldn't be standing here with this sign. You wouldn't be here with the wealth you guys stole. You guys wouldn't be here.
It's
because
2005.
you guys wouldn't be here.
How'd you get here?
All of this wouldn't be here if you guys didn't steal it.
Did you drive?
You guys didn't make it in
How about the road
Europe.
system?
You guys stole it. You guys belong in Europe. All you guys
Camp
belong in
militia.
Europe, and you know
You
it.
should rewrite
You've been here
the
illegally for
Camp militia.
500 years. All you guys need to go back to Europe. That's what you're seeing here, is that we are telling you guys, go back to Europe. You're here illegally. What part of illegal European do you guys not get?
Hey, we took it.
That's you guys. You stole, you murdered.
Dude, I was
you
born here the same as
lied, you cheated, you're lying now, and you're racist. You're not talking about the Canadians that are stealing middle class.
They're not
white
20
jobs.
million Canadians
You're not
living here
talking
illegally.
about the jobs that you guys don't want to work. You're here protesting, guys, for jobs that you won't even work. You guys won't.
You're a liar.
Take your American flag and go do those jobs. Who here?
There's American citizens
flag?
right now in
Go do that
temporary
job then. I
agencies
want you to
waiting
go
for
do that
those
job.
jobs.
Go do it then. You go do it. You go do a job. You go do a job. Go. Go back to Europe. You guys take your American flags and go do those jobs that you guys won't do. Come on, let's see you do it.
We have Americans in temporary agencies right now.
All illegal. You guys are illegal. You are illegals for 500 years. It's time to go home. The laws were our laws. You broke the laws. You broke our laws, and you're breaking them now. You're stealing our resources. You don't respect the fucking laws. That's why. You don't know what a law is. You don't know what civilized is. We had all this land to ourselves. Who gives a shit what you care about? This is our land. You guys don't belong here.
Get back to Europe. You should go drown in the Atlantic.